There are people you'll meet in your 20s who will make you question your volume. Not directly, not with obvious insults or harsh commands, but with glances, with passive-aggressive jokes, with silences that say, "You're too much." So you start to shrink. A little at first. You don't laugh as loud. You second-guess your stories. You apologize for taking up space. And you call it politeness. You call it being easy to be around. You call it maturity. But what you're really doing is disappearing. At 25, I mistook that disappearance for growth. I thought I was becoming more chill, more low maintenance, more go with the flow. But what I was really becoming was small. Because I surrounded myself with people who only celebrated the version of me they could manage. And when you're constantly around people who can't hold your light, you begin to believe your light is the problem. If I could go back to 25, I wouldn't scream or confront or burn it all down. I would just start walking away sooner, softer, without guilt, without needing anyone else to understand. Because peace doesn't beg, and authenticity doesn't shrink. It expands. At 25, I used to live for compliments. They were fuel. Little hits of dopamine wrapped in sentences like, "You're so easy to be around. You're not like other girls. You're so chill. I love that about you. You're always down for anything. You're such a good listener. You never make things about you." And for a while, I wore those words like badges of honor, like proof I was doing this life thing right, that I was someone people wanted to keep around. But as time passed, I started to notice something. The compliments were never just compliments. They were blueprints, rules, unspoken contracts for how I was expected to behave. "You're so chill" equals, "Don't speak up when something bothers you." "You're such a good listener" equals, "Don't need to be heard." "You're so easy" don't have boundaries. "You're not like other girls" don't start acting like one. "You're down for anything" don't have preferences. Don't be difficult. And anytime I deviated, anytime I pushed back, said no, stood taller, the shift was immediate. The warmth cooled. The tone changed. The praise turned into questions. What's gotten into you? Are you okay? You've changed. Yes, I had changed. I stopped shrinking. Because I realized something no one teaches you early enough. A compliment that requires you to stay small is not a compliment. It's a leash. And for most of my early 20s, I wore that leash willingly. Because when you're raised to be pleasing, you confuse being liked with being safe. But safety that requires self-abandonment isn't safety. It's a trap. I started noticing how many times I adjusted my energy to stay digestible. How I downplayed my ambition. How I laughed off comments that cut too close. How I made myself the supporting role in my own life. Because I was afraid that shining too brightly would make someone leave. And the truth? Sometimes it did. When I stopped shrinking, the people who only knew how to love the smaller version of me didn't know what to do. Some drifted. Some criticized. Some made it clear that my growth was inconvenient. And it hurt. But it was also clarifying. Because I learned that people who truly love you don't need you to play small to stay close. They don't compliment your quiet and get offended by your truth. They don't reward your compliance and punish your boundaries. They see your bigness, your voice, your brilliance, your needs, your full, loud, messy self, and say, yes, that too, all of that. I want all of you. If I could go back to 25, I'd hold her face in my hands and say, you are not hard to love. You are just too whole for people who only know how to love fragments. I'd tell her to pay attention to the compliments that come with rules and to walk away from anyone who makes her feel like confidence is a threat. Because the people who truly see you won't make your growth feel like a betrayal. They'll make it feel like home. There's a silence that's louder than rejection. It's the silence that happens when you finally find your voice, and the people who once cheered you on stop clapping. When I was 25, I started speaking up. Not aggressively, not dramatically, just honestly. I started saying things like, that hurt. I don't find that funny. Actually, I'd rather not. I don't feel safe in this dynamic. I need more than this. And suddenly, the rooms I had always felt welcome in got quieter. Jokes didn't land the same. People shifted in their seats. Conversations moved on without me. Or I just stopped being invited to them at all. At first, I blamed myself. Maybe I was being too sensitive, too serious, too much. That old narrative crept in again. Keep it light. Be easy. don't make waves. But the deeper truth was this. I hadn't changed the volume of my voice. I had changed the direction of it. I stopped speaking to perform and started speaking to connect, to protect, to reveal what was real beneath the politeness. And that kind of truth-telling, it scares people who only ever loved your silence. I used to think I was invited to those rooms because they valued me, but some only valued me because I didn't challenge the temperature, because I made things easier, because I was predictable. And when I stopped being predictable, some rooms stopped being mine. And that's okay, because those silences revealed something vital. The volume of your truth will always rearrange the room. It doesn't mean you were wrong to speak. It means you finally heard yourself. And the people who love you, really love you, don't get quieter when you get louder. They lean in, they listen deeper, they match your frequency. But I didn't know that yet at 25. So when the silence came, I panicked. I tried to shrink again, to explain myself, to soften my edges for the comfort of others, until I realized if your voice empties a room, it was never full of your people. If your truth costs you someone, it was never a truth you could afford to hide anyway. The rooms that got quieter made space for something louder than approval. Alignment. With people who could hold nuance, hold honesty, hold me. Now, I'd rather sit in an empty room with my full voice than in a crowded one where I have to bite my tongue just to be loved. If I could go back to 25, I'd stand behind her while she spoke her truth for the first time, watch the awkward silence settle over the group, and whisper, "Don't mistake their discomfort for your mistake. Let it be quiet. Let the wrong people drift. The right ones are on their way, and they won't flinch when you show up whole." Because every time you choose your voice over your performance, you get closer to the life and the love you were always meant for. Some friendships feel like freedom. Others feel like choreography. At 25, I had both, but I didn't know how to tell the difference yet. There were friends I could sit in silence with, laugh until we cried, say, "I'm not okay," without shame. And then there were the others, the ones that came with rules. Unspoken, but heavy. Rules like, don't change too much, don't outgrow the group, don't be too ambitious, don't talk about your healing unless it's funny, don't need more than what we've always given. These were the friendships where I felt like a version of myself, but never the whole thing. The ones where I knew my role, and I was afraid of what would happen if I stopped playing it. I was the listener, the one who gave advice, the one who laughed off hurt feelings, the one who never made it about me. And it worked until I started healing, until I stopped showing up out of obligation, until I began asking myself, do I feel safe here or just familiar? That's when the cage revealed itself. Because healing doesn't just change you, it rearranges your relationships. It makes you question why you keep friendships that leave you exhausted instead of seen, why you shrink in certain group chats, why your energy dips every time their name lights up your phone. And the deeper I went into becoming myself, the harder it was to stay in spaces that only loved the version of me I was trying to outgrow. I remember one night, after setting a boundary with a friend I used to bend over backward for, they said, "You've changed." And I had. But what they really meant was, you're no longer easy to control. You're no longer playing the role I need you to play. You're no longer prioritizing my comfort over your peace. And that's when I knew. This wasn't friendship. It was a performance. A contract written in invisible ink. You stay small, I stay comfortable, and we both pretend this is love. But that's not love. That's management. That's emotional small talk dressed up as loyalty. True friendship doesn't need you to disappear. It invites your fullness. It celebrates your evolution. It challenges itself when you challenge it, because it's rooted in respect, not control. So I started letting go. Not with drama, not with long explanations. Just space, distance, silence. And you know what I found in that space? Room for real ones. For the people who didn't flinch when I said no. Who didn't mock my healing. Who didn't need me to stay broken, to stay close. People who let me be new, messy, changing. People who clapped when I rose. If I could go back to 25, I'd sit beside her while she rereads the same text thread, wondering if she's overreacting, and say, "You're not. You're finally noticing the weight of what you've been carrying. And it's okay to put it down. It's okay to want more. And it's okay to walk away from any friendship that asks you to be less than who you are becoming. Because friendships shouldn't feel like cages. They should feel like keys. I used to apologize for everything, not just for the things I did wrong, but for things I never should have felt guilty for. I apologized when I said no, when I changed my mind, when I needed time to think, when I asked for clarity, when I wanted space, when I had a boundary, when I took up a little more room than usual. At 25, my mouth moved in constant, reflexive regret, like I believed my very existence might inconvenience someone. And I thought, for a long time, that it made me polite, considerate, easy to be around. But what it really made me was invisible, because you can't be fully seen when you're constantly shrinking yourself into apology-shaped shadows. Somewhere along the way, I had absorbed the lie that being likable meant being endlessly agreeable. So I said sorry like it was punctuation, for speaking, for taking too long to text back, for setting a boundary with someone who'd crossed a dozen of mine, for finally saying the thing I'd been holding in for months. Even when I said it kindly, even when I knew it needed to be said, some part of me always followed it with, sorry, I don't mean to make this a big deal. But it was a big deal, because I was a big deal. And no one taught me that. No one told me I was allowed to take myself seriously. That clarity wasn't cruelty. That honesty wasn't hostility. That expressing my needs didn't make me selfish. It made me sovereign. So I kept apologizing, until one day I caught myself apologizing for crying during a conversation that hurt me deeply. And something inside snapped. I remember thinking, why am I sorry for feeling? Why am I making myself small for being human? That was the beginning of my unraveling, the start of a long, slow walk back to myself. And step by step, I started taking my apologies back. Not out loud, not with pride, just silently, sacredly within myself. I stopped saying sorry when someone crossed a boundary. I stopped saying sorry when I prioritized rest. I stopped saying sorry when I didn't laugh at a joke that hurt. I stopped saying sorry when I asked for what I needed instead of pretending I didn't have needs. Instead, I started saying, thank you for your patience. That doesn't work for me. I need time to process this. This is how I feel. I'm allowed to take up space, because every apology I didn't owe was a breadcrumb that led me further away from myself. And reclaiming those apologies? That was my way home. If I could go back to 25, I'd stand beside her the next time she softens her tone, or downplays her needs, or starts a perfectly valid sentence with sorry, and I'd gently touch her shoulder and say, you don't need to apologize for being. You don't need to make yourself smaller to keep others comfortable. You are not a disruption. You are not a burden. You are allowed to live fully, loudly, freely, without asking permission. Because the world doesn't need more agreeable women. It needs more women who trust their voice enough to use it without a preface or a pardon. There's a kind of silence that feels violent when you've been raised to over-explain. At 25, I believe that if I left anything, a friendship, a job, a conversation, a situationship, I owed the other person a story that made them feel okay about my decision. So I'd rehearse long, careful texts, over-apologize, downplay my discomfort so I wouldn't seem dramatic, add disclaimers like, it's not a big deal, I know this is probably silly, but I could be overthinking, but because God forbid I be clear. God forbid I say, this isn't for me anymore, and leave it at that. I used to think walking away without explaining myself was rude. Now I know it's sacred, because clarity isn't cruelty, silence isn't disrespect, and you don't owe access to people who only honored you when you were compliant. I'll never forget the first time I walked away from someone who had repeatedly crossed my boundaries and didn't offer an essay about why. I simply stopped showing up, stopped responding, stopped playing my part in the cycle of being hurt and then convincing them they hadn't meant to. And it was terrifying. I kept waiting for the guilt to eat me alive. But instead, I felt lighter. Not because the pain disappeared, but because I stopped performing for the person who caused it. I realized I'd spent most of my life trying to exit gently from people who had entered carelessly. And that's when it hit me. You don't have to make someone feel good about the fact they hurt you. Your healing doesn't require their comfort. Your boundary doesn't need a bow on top. Your growth doesn't need their approval. When someone constantly makes you feel small, it's not your job to teach them how to treat you better. It's your job to treat yourself better and walk away when they won't rise with you. I used to stay too long in situations that asked me to prove I was worth basic respect. I used to stay and explain, hoping this time they'd get it. Hoping they'd say, "I didn't know you felt that way. Let me fix it." But the ones who care don't need you to collapse into a speech to take you seriously. They notice your shifts. They ask questions. They listen. The rest? They were never going to hear you. They were only going to argue with your truth and call it a conversation. So I started walking away, more often, more quietly, with peace, not pettiness. And the world didn't end. In fact, my world finally began. I had space again, mental clarity, less chaos in my chest, more trust in my own instincts. And I started realizing, sometimes closure isn't a conversation. It's a decision. It's trusting that your discomfort is valid, even if you can't explain it neatly. It's knowing when to leave. Not after they finally understand, but when you finally do. If I could go back to 25, I'd take her hand as she wrote one more message trying to be mature and say, you don't need to bleed out a story just to justify your boundary. You are allowed to protect your peace without performing an exit monologue. You are not cold. You are clear. And that is enough. Because the first time you walk away without explaining, you don't just leave them. You return to yourself. No one prepares you for this kind of grief. The grief that doesn't come with funerals or breakups. The kind you carry quietly. Because how do you mourn someone who's still alive? How do you explain that you miss someone and also know you can't go back? At 25, I started to outgrow people I once begged the universe to keep. Friends I thought would be in my wedding. People I stayed up all night texting. Souls I once believed were part of my forever. We made memories like they were permanent. We swore we'd never drift. We cried together, laughed until our stomachs hurt, made playlists for road trips that we thought would define us. And still, it happened. Not because anyone failed, not because someone did something unforgivable, but because I grew. Or they did. Or both of us did, just in different directions. At first, I fought it. I tried harder. Texted first. Showed up even when it drained me. Tried to rekindle something that no longer fit, hoping nostalgia would be enough to stitch us back together. But eventually, I had to admit, we weren't who we used to be. And holding on out of loyalty to the past was keeping both of us from becoming who we were meant to be next. Letting go wasn't easy. It felt like betrayal. Because how could I release someone I once prayed for? Someone I asked the universe to bring into my life during one of my loneliest seasons. But then I realized, just because someone was right for a chapter doesn't mean they're meant for the whole book. And that doesn't make them a villain. It doesn't make me ungrateful. It makes us human. Some people are meant to walk with you through a season, to help you see yourself, to teach you how to love, to offer you joy in a time you didn't believe it was possible. And when that season ends, clinging to them out of guilt only creates resentment. The truth is, growth is grief, because with every version of yourself you step into, there are people who no longer recognize you, and you them. You try to laugh at the same jokes, but something feels forced. You try to talk like you used to, but now the silence between replies is louder than ever. And maybe the hardest part? There's no event to mark the ending. No final fight. No goodbye post. Just distance. And the ache of knowing that someone who once felt like home is now just a street you don't drive down anymore. If I could go back to 25, I'd sit with her in the quiet aftermath of another fading friendship and whisper, "You're not cold. You're not cruel. You're evolving. And not everyone can come with you." That doesn't mean the love wasn't real. It means it was real for then. And now it's time to honor the next version of who you're becoming. Because the people who are meant for your next chapter, they'll meet you there. Not because you held on tighter, but because you made space by letting go. And that space, it's sacred. It's the room where new, aligned, soul-deep love can arrive. So mourn the version of you that needed them. Light a candle if you have to. Cry in the car. Reread the texts one last time. Then close the chapter with gratitude. Not bitterness. Not blame. Because not all losses are failures. Some are just evidence that you're growing. And that's something worth grieving and celebrating too. There was a time when being called too much felt like a scarlet letter, too sensitive, too emotional, too intense, too ambitious, too opinionated, too deep. At 25, I had a whole list of things I'd been told I was too much of, and I carried those words like warnings, tiny alarms reminding me to dial it back, speak a little softer, laugh a little less, don't ask big questions, don't feel too deeply, don't dream too loudly. I didn't want to be too much, because that always seemed to be the thing that made people leave. So I became smaller, simpler, more agreeable, more go with the flow. And people stayed, but only for the version of me that made them comfortable. They stayed because I was palatable, not because I was whole. And that kind of acceptance, it's never real. It's a rented room in someone else's idea of who you should be. The rent is your authenticity. The cost is your voice. Eventually, that rent became too high because I couldn't shrink forever. My feelings still swelled up in quiet moments. My dreams still tugged at my sleeves when I tried to ignore them. My voice, the real one, started to get louder in the silence. And when I finally let her out, the shift was immediate. Some people said I changed. Some pulled away. Some just disappeared. And I cried. Because when you've spent years shape-shifting to be loved, being left for standing in your truth feels like proof that your worst fear is true. I really am too much. But then, slowly, like sunrise, something new began to grow in that space. Peace, clarity, freedom, joy that wasn't based on being chosen, but on being real. And I realized I was never too much. I was just too honest for people who preferred the lie. There is a deep beauty in becoming too much for the wrong people, because that's when you finally see who's real, who's here not for the costume, but for the core, not for your quietness, but for your truth. And more than that, you become right for yourself. You stop living on eggshells. You stop rehearsing conversations before you have them. You stop editing your emotions in real time. You stop wondering, can I say this and still be loved? Because now you know, if I can't say it and still be loved, it's not love. Now, I've embraced being too much. Because what used to be too much for them is exactly enough for the people meant to walk with me. The way I feel deeply, it's not a flaw, it's a compass. The way I speak passionately, it's not overwhelming, it's alive. The way I care loudly, it's not embarrassing, it's rare. If I could go back to 25, I'd sit beside her the next time she quiets herself in a group, biting her tongue, shrinking her laughter, folding her truth into something easier. And I'd say, let them think you're too much. Let them misunderstand you. Let them leave. Every person who walks away because you refuse to perform makes space for someone who sees your fullness as a gift, not a threat. Because the beauty of becoming too much for the wrong people is that it makes you undeniable to the right ones. And more importantly, it makes you undeniable to yourself. There's a version of you that only comes out when you feel completely safe, unfiltered, unapologetic, soft in all the right places, sharp in others, silly, deep, curious, quiet, loud, whatever your real looks like. But for a long time, I didn't feel safe enough to be her. At 25, I'd hidden so many pieces of myself, not because I was ashamed of them, but because I'd been taught they were too hard to love. I hid my sensitivity because somewhere along the way, I was told it made me weak. That crying easily or feeling deeply meant I wasn't emotionally mature. So I laughed off things that hurt, numbed instead of named, smiled when my throat burned with unshed tears. I hid my dreams, because when I started speaking big visions out loud, I noticed the energy shift, the subtle eye rolls, the silence, the patronizing, that's cute. So I stopped talking about the things that lit me up, dimmed my ambition, chose safety over risk, silence over rejection. I hid my weirdness. The part of me that loves talking to herself in the car, dances alone in the kitchen, asks philosophical questions at 2 a.m., or randomly sings what she's doing like life is a musical. I told myself to be normal, to not draw attention, to tone it down. But hiding doesn't make you lovable. It just makes you lonely. Because the more you disappear behind what's palatable, the more the real you forgets how to breathe. And then one day, quietly, I began reclaiming her. Not in a movie moment, not with fanfare, but in small, sacred decisions. I let myself cry in front of someone and didn't apologize for it. I shared a dream that scared me and owned it out loud. I wore something that felt like me instead of what was flattering. I said, I actually love that weird thing about me, and meant it. I stopped laughing when something wasn't funny. I stopped pretending I was okay when I wasn't. I stopped editing my joy just to be more tolerable. And in doing that, I met her again. The version of me I used to only see in glimpses, in solitude, in art, in mirrors when I wasn't trying to impress anyone. And she didn't need fixing. She needed permission to exist fully, to be whole, not just likable. What I learned is this: the parts of you that you hide are often the very parts that will lead you home. Your softness is not a liability. Your depth is not too much. Your quirks are not flaws to correct. They're fingerprints of your uniqueness. And the moment you stop abandoning them, you begin to attract people who love you because of those things, not despite them. Now, I don't want to be known for how well I blended in. I want to be remembered for how boldly I showed up. If I could go back to 25, I'd sit beside her the next time she silences her own laugh or deletes a text that felt too honest and say, you don't have to be anyone else to be loved. You don't have to shave yourself down to be accepted. The right people will never ask you to hide. And the real you? She's magic. Let her come out. Let her stay. Because the only thing more exhausting than hiding is living your whole life as a version of yourself you don't even recognize. And the only thing more liberating than being loved by someone else is finally loving yourself exactly as you are. If you had asked me at 25 what boundaries were, I would have said something like, it's when you finally cut toxic people off. And sure, sometimes it is. But now I know boundaries are less about cutting people off and more about finally including yourself in the conversation. Back then, I thought being a good person meant always being available, always saying yes, always listening, always forgiving, even when it hurt, even when my body said no. I confused self-sacrifice with kindness. I confused exhaustion with generosity. I confused peacekeeping with love. So I let people overstep. I made excuses. I called it giving them grace, when really, I was just too afraid to lose them. But here's what I know now. You don't set boundaries to control other people. You set them to protect your peace. And peace, it's not a spa day. It's not silence or avoidance. It's not pretending things don't bother you. Peace is being able to sit in your own body and not feel like you're betraying yourself every time you say yes to something that makes your stomach tighten. Peace is knowing you can leave the room, the relationship, the expectation, without needing to perform guilt. It's not easy, though, because at first, setting boundaries feels like punishment, especially if you were raised to be agreeable. People will push back. They'll say, you've changed. You're being difficult. You used to be so chill. And all of it will tempt you to revert, to soften your no, to round the edges of your truth, to explain, justify, over-apologize. But the longer you hold the line, the more you'll feel it. The quiet power of peace. The peace of walking away from a conversation that used to wreck your nervous system. The peace of choosing rest over resentment. The peace of knowing that love, real love, will never require your self-abandonment. You'll start to realize you don't need to pick up every call. You don't need to answer texts right away. You don't owe access to people who drain you. No is a complete sentence. Silence is a response. Peace is louder than explanation. Now, boundaries are my love language to myself, because when I protect my peace, I show up better, more honest, more whole, more me. And the people who are aligned, they don't just accept my boundaries, they respect them, they understand them, they set their own. Because peace doesn't feel like walking on eggshells. It feels like walking into a room with your shoulders down. If I could go back to 25, I'd sit next to her as she drafts a long, soft message, trying not to sound mean, and say, you're not being mean. You're being clear. And clarity is kindness, even when it makes people uncomfortable. Because the only people who get angry at your boundaries are the ones who benefited from you not having any. And the ones who are meant to stay, they'll stay. Even with your no, even with your limits, even with your growth, especially with your peace. If you're 25 right now, you're probably holding more than anyone can see. Smiling in group photos, answering I'm good when you're not, keeping the peace, keeping the relationships, keeping the mask in place, even when it's suffocating you. You might be asking questions you don't say out loud. Why do I feel so drained? Why am I the one always reaching out? Why do I feel lonelier with them than I do by myself? But you stay. You stay because you think loyalty is love. You stay because you've shared memories, inside jokes, pieces of your past. You stay because letting go feels like failure. Let me tell you what I wish someone had told me. You're allowed to outgrow people, even the ones who were once your whole world. Outgrowing doesn't make you selfish. It makes you self-aware. Because growth has a cost, and sometimes that cost is proximity. You will evolve in ways people won't recognize. You will heal in ways that don't match the version of you they prefer. And it will hurt. You'll question yourself. You'll grieve friendships that don't have a clean ending. You'll feel guilty for saying less, for needing space, for pulling back. But you are not wrong for protecting your peace. You are not cold for wanting depth over history. You are not a bad friend for wanting to feel seen, not just remembered. At 25, no one taught me that friendships have seasons, that some people are meant to walk with you to the edge of a chapter, but not into the next one. No one told me that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away before resentment makes a home in your heart. So if you're 25 right now and you feel the shift, if your body tightens every time their name lights up your phone, if you find yourself silencing your joy, your opinions, your boundaries, just to keep the connection alive, listen to that. You don't need to hate someone to let them go. You don't need a dramatic exit to choose yourself. You don't need to explain your peace to people who've never tried to understand your pain. You are not obligated to remain in any relationship that asks you to abandon who you're becoming just to maintain who you were. Letting go isn't giving up. It's growing up. It's realizing that some friendships were built for the version of you who didn't know how to say no, who didn't know she deserved space, voice, depth, reciprocity. And now that you know, you're allowed to move differently. You're allowed to say, this doesn't feel like home anymore. I love who we were, but not who we are now. I'm no longer available for this kind of connection. Because when you start honoring your truth, even quietly, even awkwardly, the world rearranges around it. You begin to attract people who see you clearly, who celebrate your growth, who don't just tolerate your boundaries, they model their own, who meet you in the middle, not just when it's convenient. These are your people, but you'll never find them if you keep setting yourself on fire to keep old rooms warm. So let it go. Let it fade. Let yourself be misunderstood by those who were only ever fluent in the language of your silence. Because your peace is not up for negotiation. And your future, it's waiting. It's spacious. It's honest. It's filled with people who can hold the real you without making you shrink to fit. If you're 25 right now, take the long way home. Unlearn the noise. Grieve what you outgrow. And whatever you do, don't apologize for evolving.